First, thank you so much for having me here today. This is my favorite city in the region. I did some exploring last night, and if you're looking for a place to eat, just by the way, we stumbled across this gorgeous little restaurant. It's an Italian-Japanese fusion, who would have thought, called Radici. So that's an amazing thing about Toronto. All of the little coffee shops, all the little restaurants, it's so much fun to explore. I'm also really grateful to Building Transformations for having me here to be able to talk about a subject near and dear to my heart, which is scaring the bejesus out of people on what is to come in climate, in technology, and everything else. But beyond scaring people, I'm hoping that there's things that you'll take away from this talk. So what I want to start with is the ultimate objective of everything we do as stewards and designers of the built environment should be around health. Yes, productivity is really important. And I'm going to even broaden that definition and say that the more people that we have that are healthy, fully employed, if they want to be, and the more people that actually have employment, the better off we will be as a country. And so what I hope to arm you with today, a lot of people in the room have their ideas about how to improve design, about how to improve the built environment. I'm hoping to arm you with some of those stories and statistics that help you convince decision makers of the kinds of changes we need to make for a more productive built environment. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the current state of things, where trends are taking us, and then a few solutions that I see, both to increase the amount of people that are able to work in Canada, increase the amount of time that they're able to work, and then reducing costs as well. So Canada's big issues. There's been a lot of talk recently about Canada's big issues. The first one is around housing, which you just heard a little bit about. We need 5.8 million new homes by 2030. Aled, you can correct me later for the exact number, but homelessness is expected to triple in just the next 5 years. That is staggering. 10% of Canadians live below the poverty line. That is staggering. In terms of health, don't ask me why they started in 1993, but the wait times for treatments in hospitals have almost tripled since 1993. That is a concern. Health, the sizing is fine, you can leave it. Health, 20% of Canadians don't have access to a family doctor. That is something else that affects people's productivity. They don't get treatments, they can't get better. In terms of energy transition, the demand for electricity will double over the next several years. In terms of national security and defense, also a really big issue. Cyber is a top security issue. 10 to 15% of hospitals, schools, transit owners have already experienced a cyber attack in Canada. So this is a massive issue for us. In terms of climate, there's already $25 billion a year of damage due to climate change. Keep that number in your head because it changes looking into the future. We've heard a lot about AI. I'm assuming you'll have spoken a lot about AI, so I'm not going to touch too much on it. It's a big topic and it's important. And finally, reconciliation. The Assembly for First Nations has estimated that it will cost $350 billion to bring First Nations infrastructure up to the same level as the rest of Canada. What could that mean if we actually invested in those communities? How much would productivity in Canada improve? So that was kind of current state with a little bit of hint on some future. But when we look at future trends, we're thinking about technology, climate, society, and resources. And so this is kind of a laundry list of things, of outlooks that we can see for Canada. In health and housing, Healthcare costs will increase by 30% in just the next 5 years. Energy, there's going to be huge investments just by the federal government, 125 to 140 billion, just to bring our infrastructure to a net zero level. Big investments in AI, and now I'm struggling. And I won't fall off the edge here. So yeah, in national security, huge investments in the defense sector. And then in terms of climate, our climate damage will quadruple from 25 billion to 100 billion in just the next few years. So this should be slightly mortifying that this is where we're headed towards. And we're talking about trying to improve productivity. This is undermining everything that we're trying to work towards. So we actually have to fix those foundations at the same time as we're trying to get better with technology. And I want to do a little deep dive into climate change, because the climate will infect our infrastructure, the cost of our infrastructure in 3 main ways. The first is that it will shorten the life of our infrastructure. A really fascinating study was done by the Financial Accountability Office of Ontario that looked at increased rainfall, increased heat, increased freeze-thaw cycles, and said, what will this mean for the life of our buildings, roads, stormwater, water supply? And they found the biggest impact will be on roads and stormwater systems. And it will increase the cost of those assets by between 60 and 100%. Now, if you're in the building sector, you're thinking, that's not my thing, that's okay. But actually, that's going to mean a whole lot less money for everything else. And by the way, when I presented this to the Liberal caucus in New Brunswick a couple of days ago, and they had no idea that these kinds of changes were coming. They're not budgeting for them right now. So this is a real concern. So that's the first way that climate change will increase the cost of infrastructure, is by shortening their lives. The second way is by increasing the demand for infrastructure. So as we have more hot days, we'll need more reservoirs, bigger reservoirs to hold the water. As we have more hot days, we'll need to insulate our buildings more and insulate the electrical components more. So there's a lot there. There's also the operating and maintenance costs. As things get hotter, there's more cooling that's required, potentially, depending on how you design. And the third way that climate change will increase the cost of our infrastructure is the unit inputs. The people doing work, insurance costs, because the land that we want to build on, or the cost of getting insurance for construction is increasing because of increased storms, increased flooding. And so the unit costs also increase because people that are affected by climate change actually can work less. There's more absenteeism if they're affected by a flood, for example. When it's hotter, then there's fewer hours of the day people can work, or it shifts the way they need to work. So just to drive that point home in terms of a buildings context, take this to be a city in Canada where right now they have about 8 very hot days per year. And I think very hot meant over 35 degrees Celsius. Between now and 2050, that will increase to 21 hot days per year. That's more than doubling. Now, I've only taken a straight line extrapolation here, but you can start to think about what that means for the increase in operational costs of our buildings and other kinds of infrastructure. So if we're looking at productivity, and if we're looking at what that means for the future, we're going to start making different decisions than what we have in the past. We have no choice. So we're really at this tipping point. We actually can't afford, I showed you all the investments we have to make in Canada. That's just at federal level and the amount of money the federal government is planning to make. Then we need to look at the provinces, municipalities, and others. We actually can't afford to do all of this in the same way we've always been doing it. The climate challenge introduces the opportunities for new materials, insulating in different ways. The appetite for green infrastructure should start to shift. Our health situation is becoming just untenable. We can't keep doing it the way we've been doing it. We actually have to look at a more preventive way of working. And maybe we can think about more digital ways of working too. So what I'm about to show you is a few ways that we can really change the way we've been working in Canada. They're not building specific, but they're certainly infrastructure centered. The first way is by starting to think about green infrastructure. What you're seeing here is a chart. The red bars show you the cost of traditional infrastructure for wastewater and water treatment. And the dark red bars, I really hope that you are not colorblind, is the cost of green infrastructure. So what this is saying is that for people that are treating we have our wastewater treatment plants, the traditional kinds, and what we can actually do is use forests. Forests absorb a lot of the nutrient that we need to be treating. So it's not saying, let's just throw all of our stuff onto forests just like that. There's a way of doing it. But the capacity to reduce the amount of physical infrastructure that we need to build and continue to operate over the long term is hugely different. In New York City, the middle bar that you see there is around water treatment. In New York City, they were faced with an $8 billion decision to upgrade their water treatment plants. Instead of upgrading them, they actually worked with the landowners upstream on nutrient management programs, because when the cows are on the land and it rains, stuff flows into the river and needs to be treated. They also planted vegetation and bought up some of the land, so there was bigger buffer zones. So much less nutrient was going into the water, and they actually didn't have to upgrade their plant at all. Now that requires a whole different way of working and thinking and skill set. Speaking of skill set, green infrastructure and green ways of working actually bring more jobs. Now this is specific to the type of work, but this gives you an example of how many times more jobs we actually get when we invest in green. Investing in public transportation, active transportation, cycleways brings in 50%, almost 50% more jobs than investing in road construction. You see, for solar, how many times more jobs we can create from solar than from traditional oil and gas type of investments. And then ecosystem retrofits bring us huge benefits. So that's the green side. Now in technology, this is something that many people are probably a bit more familiar with. There's a lot we can do on construction sites to optimize the cost and also reduce fuel consumption by having real-time location systems, having our people and equipment at the right place at the right time hugely reduces fuel consumption. Having a BIM approach can reduce the total costs of a project by between 8 and 15%. And yes, that's based on reduced rework. It's based on reduced fighting, arbitration between parties, because nobody knew it was really there on site, or what was that connection between different parties on the site. But there's other ways that we can use technology as well. We can use it to nudge people to actually consume less water, consume less power, produce less solid waste. And these nudges, you get those things in the mail that say, you're consuming 10% more water than your neighbor. And that actually works to reduce people's consumption by as much as 10%. And that 10% doesn't sound like a lot, but it could mean that we can defer infrastructure, additional infrastructure by 10 years or more. So the implications are really huge. The other way that we can, this is less about reducing costs and more about improving productivity overall in Canada, is we can invest in those areas where there's not a lot of equity. So engineers in the room, think about potential. This is the lowest bar, this is the highest bar. If we're talking about a dam, as soon as you remove that difference between the two, the amount of energy that is released is massive. If we invest in First Nations communities, their levels will be brought up to such that the productivity in the whole country overall, not output per person, but total output will increase massively. There was a study in New Brunswick, by Ability New Brunswick, that was done around people with disabilities and how much more giving them access to the built environment would increase GDP in the province. It would increase it by 2 billion. The population of New Brunswick is about 40 times less than the rest of Canada. So we're looking at maybe an $80 billion increase in GDP if we're investing in facilities that allow people with disabilities to participate. That's just looking at First Nations and people with disabilities. Where else are there pockets of people that are not able to work for all kinds of reasons, and what would happen if we gave them a platform to participate in our labor force? My final little point on how to increase output, or rather increase the local economy. When I say local, this can be all of Canada, is to buy locally. And I don't mean to sound like protectionist, but what I do want to point out is that there was a fascinating study done in Australia. It was 30 years ago. It was in Australia, but it really makes you think. What is the case here in Canada? So this person was asked to do a study for the state of Victoria for Treasury on when we invest in infrastructure, how much of that money stays in the local economy and how much of it leaves. And they found that when they invest in capital works, 50% of that money stays locally and the other 50 goes outside because materials have been procured elsewhere, head offices are from elsewhere, and so the profits go elsewhere. So that's really interesting because it starts you thinking about how do we increase that percentage to stay within our country, within our local communities. It's a challenge. Now, a similar study was done in British Columbia on the different effects of independent businesses and buying from independent businesses versus buying from multinationals. And they found that buying from independent businesses kept 4.5 times more profit money circulating in the local economy than if they bought from multinationals. That's a massive difference and could have huge implications for our economy. So you're saying, okay, like, that all sounds really good. How do we make these kinds of changes? And I want to allude a little bit to what Alid was talking about. He mentioned policy changes, and that's really important. The people in the room here do not underestimate how much more you know than the decision makers you're talking to about your area. It is striking, the amount of knowledge that you have. Because remember, you live it, you breathe it, you dream about how to do things better. All you need to do is align your thinking with what those bigger policy objectives are so that you can make that connection for them and help build that business case. So what I've shown here is there's little you. You are in the bottom left-hand corner with a few friends. But you're also part of maybe an industry organization, a professional organization of people that can together work towards a common goal. You're also part of a company or an institution of some kind. That's another area of influence that you have. And then you're also part of something else. You have government to go to as well, right? And so government is where policy is happening. All of these connections are incredibly important to start making change. And when we think about making change, policy is part of it. Assigning roles and responsibilities is part of it. And these changes have to be made at every single level here. They have to be made within an organization and within government. If there's no owner, then that's it. And we also need to provide those tools and templates that help people literally walk through the steps and understand how we move here. So these are the ways that we can actually make change collectively. There are all kinds of ways of reducing the cost of our infrastructure and increasing the value that we provide to society. I'll give you a little example of how I see this collaboration really coming out. Health is a huge challenge in Canada, but 20 to 30% of chronic disease is because of not enough physical activity. 20 to 30%. Yet, kids that live within 400 meters of a park are 60% less likely to be obese. People that live near an active transport corridor or near public transit are 15% more likely, get 15% more exercise. So get closer to that amount we need to have. So what if we shifted the balance? Could investing more in community infrastructure take the burden off the healthcare system? If it could, then we could be investing a lot more, and suddenly that whole funding framework, setting objectives, looks a lot different. And what does that need? Well, it needs to map out who is responsible for health through our whole life cycle in Canada. Who are the players in your local community? It is your municipalities. It is your provincial and federal governments. But so far, municipalities are not held accountable. And this is not a blow on municipalities. Employers also have a huge impact on our health. And they don't have a formal role in this. And so what if there was this formal approach to measuring everyone's contribution and to funding it, finding a way to fund it in a way that works toward this overarching objective of better health in Canada? So that's just looking at the health picture. We can look at similar ways of saying, hey, we see all of these increasing, rising costs. What are other ways? Who are the players we need to bring together to have multi-purpose buildings, for example? What are the ways that we can reduce the cost of our infrastructure, but also really provide the quality of outcomes that we need? It's not about producing more hospitals. It's about producing healthcare infrastructure that actually makes people healthier. And so what I'd like you to take away is that the overarching objective for Canada, for what we do, can be around health. Even when I think about hospitals, some of my colleagues did a fascinating study a couple of years ago on 3 hospitals in the US. They had before and after statistics. And the main difference was a lot more daylight in the hospitals. And what they found, just with the additional daylight in the hospitals, is that staff turnover reduced by 10%. Patients staying in beds after surgery reduced by 10%. Medication costs reduced by 20%. So there's huge implications. And this is the kind of information that our clients and decision makers need to know about why it's important to build full quality into our infrastructure. I hope I've armed you with a few extra statistics and stories to convince your clients or decision makers to move forward in the way that you know will make a difference. Thank you.